All right, so let's get started. I know we're a little bit early, but we ran a bit out of time last time, so I want to make sure that we cover some of the things I didn't get to cover. But first, I want to read some verses. And yes, they're single verses. You don't get the context and all that's behind them, but if you'd like to read more into it, you can make note of it, and I'll email them to you and read them more with more depth. But they are out of context, so take that for what it is. 1 Timothy 4:8. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has a value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. And in 1 Corinthians 3:17, if anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Genesis 1, verse 29. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And lastly, 1 Corinthians 6:20. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. So next I'm going to just read to you how these verses hit me. Okay? So, and it may speak to you differently, but this is just my version. So take it for what it is. Your body was created by God, and you are entrusted to take good care of it. Your spiritual life will have an impact on your present and eternal life, which is more important than your physical life. But remember that God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. God created food perfectly designed for all of our body's needs. You were bought at a price, therefore, in all that you do, including the care of your physical and spiritual life, honor God with your bodies. And this is something that is on my mind on a daily basis, and perhaps it's because of my personal story in my health. I was born with a congenital heart defect. I've had 3 heart surgeries. 2 of them were open heart surgeries. And so from really early in my life, I always wanted to know, of all the decisions I make every day, I want to make the right ones that put me in a position to better heal and to have better function for as long as possible. But I didn't know where to get that information. And that was my challenge as a child. So I knew that whatever profession I would be in the future, it would be a profession that would help me gain that knowledge, or maybe put me in a position where I could better understand how to gain it myself. And ultimately, it has led me to where I am today. But when I read these verses, that's what I think. Because when I pray to God, I want Him to use me, and I want to do my part to be the absolute best tool for Him as possible. So I don't want to slow that down or suppress what I can potentially do at a higher level. So last week, we talked about sugar, and we talked about ultra-processed foods. Today, we're going to talk about sleep. But as we transition into sleep, and sleep is critical, it's one of those things that, yeah, it feels good when you get really good sleep, but it's huge. It is one of the 3 non-negotiables that I mentioned before, because when sleep is not good, if the quality is not good enough, or the duration of your sleep is not good enough, the impact is body-wide. It affects your mind, it affects your mood, it affects your hormones, it affects your growth, your ability to repair, to heal. It affects you physically, mentally, and I would argue that it has an impact on your spiritual life as well. So one of probably the lead question that I've been asked, and I'm not surprised that's the question that came, because I get that question all the time at work as well, and that is, well, what do we eat now, right? So what do we do? We're making all these changes, But how do you make that happen? And I would just encourage you to start one meal at a time. So don't expect that it'll be perfect right away. Just take a step forward. Don't feel like you have to change everything overnight, but start one meal at a time and try to keep it simple initially, because you can get really extravagant in meal prep and making amazing meals that are tasty but more complex in preparation. But let's start simple. And what I'm going to share with you is really what my favorites are and what I do, because I've been living this way for a very long time. My ultimate favorite breakfast is a smoothie. So I do make a smoothie every morning, and my wife could tell you that sometimes it's more than once a day because I really love them so much. And in my smoothies, I'll put fruit, vegetables, and some protein. And so I like to have that mix, but I also like my smoothies to be thick, creamy. I want to feel like I just had a satisfying, full meal when I have my smoothies. And so I like to add things that have more fat in them, like avocado. Avocados will make it thicker, creamier, or you can put nut butters in there, and a good protein. The protein that I use most often is a chocolate-flavored protein because I like chocolate a lot. I like vanilla too, but it is sweetened with monk fruit, so therefore it does not have an effect on your blood sugar. So every day I have one of those, and my second favorite meal is going to be really anything you can put in a bowl. I love bowls of all kinds, but my favorite ones are salads, and it doesn't mean that it's just green leaves in there. I mean, you can add some seeds, some nuts, lots of olive oil. I mean, I like fat, so I want as much fat in my food as I can tolerate. It's good for your brain, it's good for your immune system, for your body. The mistake that we often make is when we take away sugar, we don't replace it with something that is satisfying. And you need those fats to satisfy. And they are good for you. So my favorite dressings are going to be olive oil and balsamic vinegar, but there are some other great options now. More and more salad dressings are being made that have really good ingredients in them. But my favorite is simple. Again, keep it simple. Olive oil, balsamic vinegar. But I also like to put protein on my salads, whether it be a chicken salad that is homemade, or whether it just be straight out eggs on it, or steak, or chicken, anything like that. You can add some proteins to it, or nuts. I love to just put cashews on my salad. So that way you've got some healthy fats, you get some protein, and it's not just a bunch of leaves, right? But you can make a cooked meal in a bowl too. You can, add some sauces, and I don't like dry food. I like, if I'm going to cook something, I like to have plenty of oils in there, and so you can mix up a whole bunch of vegetables and some animal protein or some eggs, or make it vegetarian, if you want to. But make sure to add some good healthy fats in there, and that makes it a lot more satisfying. Actually, it was yesterday, I picked up, and I'm not a big meat eater, but my boys are. They love meat. So for me, it's a little bit here and there, and I'm satisfied. I just my body doesn't break it down super well. But we do buy our meat from a local farm. So there's a farm, and I'll send you the contact and everything so you can get it yourself. But they actually came and delivered to my house yesterday. So if you place a good enough order, they'll bring it to you. But otherwise, they bring it locally here. And the farm's an hour and a half away, but they do come about weekly in the area. So you can order some meat, some beef it's a Wagyu beef, and so it means it has a little bit more fat in it, but because their cows are free roaming, they're in a very low stress environment, they have good lives, they're fed, they're grass fed, and all of their feeds are grown on the land that they live on. They can control the mineral content of the soil and all those things. Therefore, their cows actually have a lot more omega-3 fats in them, which is typically what you eat fish for, right? You want to get more omega-3s. So Anyway, so I'll send you that information in the notes. And if you did not get notes before and you want to be on the list, we do have a sheet up front here, so you can add your name and your email to it. Oh, Carol's got it in the back as well. Okay. All right. Now, as we transition from sugar to sleep, I think it's appropriate to start off with, what is the impact of sugar on sleep? Well, as a blanket answer, I'd say it's not good. You know, more sugar does not give you better sleep. However, we can also argue that some carbohydrates not too long before sleep can actually improve sleep. So with that in mind, I would say, you know, if you consume complex carbohydrates or starchy carbohydrates like a potato or something like that, have that with your dinner, that actually has the potential to help and improve the quality of your sleep. So the thing with sugar and its effect on your ability to sleep, it's very individualized, you know, depending on your health state. So for example, anybody here have a hard time falling asleep? Yeah. Anybody have a hard time staying asleep? Okay. So that's different, right? What was that one?
Does anybody have a hard time sleeping?
Oh, all around, both. So the interesting thing about sugar and your blood sugar levels is, depending on what they are, it can either make it harder to fall asleep or harder to stay asleep. So people who have a hard time staying asleep tend to be, and again, it's not 100% foolproof, but in general, tend to be hypoglycemic, meaning your blood sugar is too low. And people who have a hard time falling asleep tend to be hyperglycemic, right? Sugar is too high. So if you have a hard time falling asleep, you don't want to get that sugar spike before you go to bed. All right. Now, I'm going to actually send you in the notes, and I'm not going to read all of it, but there is actually put together a chart of symptoms of hypoglycemia and symptoms of hyperglycemia, and I'll send that to you. But in general, hypoglycemia and its effects on sleep. So low blood sugar, not only can it make it hard to stay asleep, but it can also, you know, if you're prone to nightmares or sweating excessively at night, those are all symptoms that are related to it. If you're irritable, you're tired, you're confused when you wake up, you know, those are all indications that it could be blood sugar related and affecting your ability to sleep. Now, one of the greatest benefits of sleep is the production of human growth hormone. And we tend to think of that hormone as, this is critical for kids, right? Because they're in their growing ages. But it's also really important for adults as well. And so it is when we sleep that we produce 75% of our HGH, or human growth hormone. The second most, or during the day, the one activity the one thing you can do to really promote the most amount of HGH production other than sleep is exercise. So you're asking about exercise. There you go. That's almost all I'm going to say about exercise. So this is not an exercise talk. However, yes, exercise is incredible for sleep. If you look at exercise, it's kind of good for everything. You know, it always comes down. There's all sorts of fads that come up, and next thing you know, well, turns out exercise really is the best thing for this. So we are meant to be moving, and so as much as you can, try to exercise. It does improve your HGH production. Some of the symptoms of low HGH, or low human growth hormone levels in your body, are increased body fat. And I want to mention that because, have you ever noticed, like if you look at your waist before you go to sleep and when you wake up, right, there's often a sense of, did I just lose weight overnight? I did the pure opposite of working out, but it looks like I just worked out all night, right? And that's what HGH does. So that good quality sleep that you can get can make such a big impact on your weight. And we're going to talk about what you can do about it. We're getting there. So next, low HGH levels can increase your risk of heart disease, and it can worsen your mood and your overall well-being. And it can make your heart, your muscles, and your bones weaker. Maybe that's where I broke my foot. No, I don't think so. Anyway, so I get super great sleep. I probably just don't get enough of it, but the quality of my sleep is great. So me personally, the one thing I need to work on more is sleeping a little longer. But anyway, well, that's me. And I didn't used to sleep really well, so as I go through this, I'll give you some amazing tips to try to make that your experience. So that way, even if you have a short night's sleep, you can wake up and be just ready to go. So there are three main players in this whole story. And I'm sure by now you're getting a sense. It's a little bit different than last week because it's not so much about what we're eating, but what we're doing. And so there's a lot of action steps that you can take that can have a great impact on your quality of sleep. So the three main players are going to be adenosine, which is a neurotransmitter. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and I'll repeat them many times, so you'll be so familiar with them by the time we're done. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter, and it's inhibitory. That's what makes you feel sleepy the longer that you're awake. Cortisol, which is a hormone, and cortisol is in its greatest production earlier in the day, or it should be anyway, to give you a boost of energy and make you feel awake. And then melatonin, I think, is one that most people who have sleep issues have heard of. And that's a hormone that makes you sleepy, right? Puts you to sleep at night. So our sleep-wake cycle is impacted by those three things. You know, if we were to really minimize it, let's talk about the three most important key players in this whole story. So from a chemical standpoint, let's talk a little bit more about adenosine. So adenosine creates a sleep drive or a sleep hunger. The longer that you're awake, the more it builds up in your system. And it works by blocking neurotransmitters that make you feel awake. What would you say is the opposite of what adenosine does? What's its antagonist, if you were to take a guess? Caffeine. Caffeine, absolutely, caffeine. So what caffeine does is it occupies that receptor, blocking adenosine. All right, so adenosine wants to do its job, caffeine's there, there's nowhere to park, and it can't do its thing. That's what caffeine does. And so the thing with caffeine is you've got to be really aware of its half-life. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours, and this can vary from person to person, so it'll be much weaker after those 6 hours, but its full life is 12 hours, and of course it just declines significantly after that 6 hours. So if you have caffeine in the afternoon and you're blocking those receptors, you know, that adenosine is supposed to occupy, it will make it harder for you to fall asleep. And so it's interesting because I have family that live in Europe, and you know, everywhere you go in a restaurant in Europe, it doesn't matter what time it is. I mean, after you eat your meal and you have your wine, the next thing is, are you ready for your espresso or your coffee? This is so backwards. And then they consume it, and you know, I guess a lot of them must sleep okay. I don't know. But there are some people who can handle that. You know, they can take it. Their makeup is such that, you know, they can drink coffee late and still go to sleep. I would argue that they would sleep a lot better if it didn't do that. But anyway, I personally cannot handle caffeine. I just don't do well at any time, anyhow. It doesn't matter. My body just doesn't do well with it. So if you're blocking that sense of being sleepy because you're not sleeping well enough at night and you're just feeling sleepy all the time, I can understand why we would consume caffeine. My recommendation here was try to have it all just early in the day and then be done with it. Give your body a chance to maybe get that boost initially, which could be beneficial, but make sure that you're syncing it with your circadian rhythm. You want that boost early, like within that first 30 minutes or so in the morning, okay? Now, another important thing that can be a problem is something called glutamate or glutamate excitotoxicity. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, kind of like adenosine is a neurotransmitter. These are smaller particles in our brain that travel through our neurons, and Hormones are bigger, they're larger, and they travel through our bloodstream. So if we have glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and we have adenosine, which is an inhibitory, that's your gas and your brake pedal, right? So the reason why I bring up glutamate is because glutamate, especially toxins that mimic glutamate, are stimulants. They would certainly make it harder to fall asleep, but they are found in foods, that, especially the ones that have more preservatives or pesticides, all those chemicals that don't belong in foods. We talked about those last week. So if anything, if you were going to have an organic meal, have it for dinner if it's going to be just one of those meals. But in general, you want to try to avoid it because those toxins, they excite the neurons, which kind of drives more of a stress sympathetic response in your body. Now, one of the things that we have the most control over is, I would say, potentially one of the most influential factors on sleep, and that is light. There is so much to talk about when it comes to light. Light is the most important and influential aspect on sleep. Light, of course, created by God. God had a perfect design, when we should be awake, when we should be asleep. I don't know if you've ever been camping, but if you don't have the artificial light and you're outside, as soon as it starts getting dark and there are no devices to get on, you get tired like super early. It could be 7 p.m. and it feels like it's midnight, right? That's the natural design for the human body. Light is the primary time giver. And so light affects cortisol production in the morning and melatonin in the evening. When waking, you get the pulse of cortisol and adrenaline, and this starts a timer. It's a 12-hour timer. So as soon as you get that cortisol pulse, 12 hours later, you'll get a melatonin that'll kick in, okay? Now, there are ways to kind of dilute that effect, and I'm leading there. Neurons in the eyes are the ones that set the circadian clock, and they respond best to sunlight. So one of the best things you can do when the sun rises is to actually go outside and let that sunlight just get you right in the face. And so how long, I think, is probably the biggest question, because we're busy in the morning, we got things to do. At least 2 minutes. So as little as 2 minutes will be effective. 10 minutes will be great. If you could spend the whole day outside, that'd be awesome, but it just doesn't happen much. If you can spare 2 minutes and just go outside, and maybe you can do some prayer time outdoors if it's not too cold, and getting that light. See, the angle of the rays as well has a very important factor. So if you sleep in late and you get out to get your sunlight, but now the sun's up here instead of down here, the effect is very different. And so the actual receptors in the eye that capture the sunlight and that give you that cortisol boost, they're low on the retina, they're lower. So you need a ray that comes from above, but not too high, so that it can really hit those right on. Now, if you were to apply that notion to which lights you turn on at night when you need to go to sleep, and you have all the overhead lights, ceiling lights on, that's not ideal. You want lamps that are dim, that have more yellows in them, to be nice and low, so that they can't hit those receptors. Does that make sense? So lamps that are dim and low. Now, the thing with the light, the sunlight that comes in, especially early in the day, it has more blue rays in it. So the blue rays are really important. You don't want to put on your blue light blocking glasses first thing in the morning. You can have those later in the day, in the evening, but in the morning you want the blue lights. All right, that wakes you up, and it kicks in that cortisol pulse, if you will, give you that energy jolt first thing in the morning. What about windows? If you're in your car and you're like, I'm in the car when the sun rises, I'm good. Well, yes, it's better than being in a dark room, but it's not the same as not having glass separating, between you and the sunlight. You actually lose 50% of the effectiveness. So if you can roll down your window, it'd probably be better. Yeah, like drive like this. All right, the sun's over there. Let me turn. Take extra right turns. All right, get a convertible. That would work. All right, so that low solar angle is really important, but it's just 2 minutes, so if you can get that 2 minutes in every day. Another really important factor is timing. So if you go to bed at the same time every night and you wake up at the same time every night, you're starting to really gain control of that circadian rhythm. Okay, so that can have a big impact as well. There are some artificial lights that can help mimic the sunlight. It's nowhere near as good, but that's what they're designed for. So if you were to do a search for SAD lamps, so SAD, so seasonal affective disorder, SAD lamps, it'll come up with all sorts of different lamps that you could just turn on, you put on your desk, you turn it on maybe early in the morning so that you're getting more of that light. I've never actually tried them, but just want to give you that information if you don't have any other good options. But also the sunlight viewing at sundown can also help to not only solidify that circadian clock, but it's also neuroprotective, meaning later in the day when you're exposed to brighter lights in the home, if you got to be exposed to the sunlight as the sun sets, it'll give you some layer of protection from being overstimulated or producing more cortisol when exposed to indoor lighting. Now, some of the times that you want to be aware of is ideally after 8 p.m., you want to try to minimize your light exposure as much as you can. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., you want to have no light exposure. And that's where when that 11 o'clock hits, if you're pushing through and you don't want to turn off the TV, and that's what I'm starting to think about more and more as I prepared for this lecture, is that 11 o'clock is really important. You want to be done with watching shows or having lights, staring at lights at 11 p.m. So that's the deadline, 11 p.m. So if you can make it earlier, it'd be even better. Now, the reason why that's so important is because if you cross that deadline, what will happen is your dopamine production will go down the next day. So dopamine is that reward neurotransmitter. It's the one that makes you feel joy. Of course, it's very involved in controlling movements, motor control, but it has a big impact on your level of joy and happiness. So if you like just to be on a device late at night, the consequences are going to be super heavy the next day. And if you're doing that on a regular basis, it's going to be building up. And so you're going to be accumulating debt, sleep debt. So if you've never heard that term before, it's real. You don't just lack sleep one night and, okay, then I get good sleep the next day, I'm good. Like, it actually does carry on. You need to recover from that. And if it's a regular thing for you, it could take a while to really pay off that debt, right? So I hope this is somewhat helpful and that you can use some of what you've heard. When you sleep, two other things that you can control is, of course, room darkness. If you can't control the darkness of the room and you don't have like light blocking curtains, you can wear an eye mask, and that's highly effective as well. And then temperature. Cooler room temperatures are better for sleep. Exactly what, I'm not really sure. I think it can vary from person to person, but in the 60 to 70 degree range is really a good place to be. And you can warm up with blankets if you want to, but that can go a long way. So as I was driving over here, the kids were asking me in the car, so what are you talking about today? And I said, oh, sleep. And goes, oh, you're going to say no devices, they shouldn't be in your room, and everything unplugged in your bedroom, that sort of stuff. Like, well, I wasn't going to talk about that too much, but that's a really good point. So, I think one of the top disruptors of sleep is Wi-Fi in our home. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to over the years that have their router like in their bedroom, in their nightstand, or close within the room, or maybe it's just under the bedroom, the room underneath, or the next one over. Either way, you want it as far away as possible. And if anything, unplugging it at night it would be super, super powerful. I have seen dramatic change in people's health when they do that. Dramatic, dramatic. And so consider that. Naps are good. You don't have to take them, but they're good as long as they're not too long. So 20 to 60 minutes at the most is ideal. I wouldn't take a nap like not too long before you go to bed. So ideally before 5, maybe earlier, like an afternoon nap. If you feel really groggy when you wake up from a nap, it's because you're not getting enough sleep at night. So that is your indicator that that's not ideal. And if you're traveling overseas, different time zones, it's much better that you push through and try to go to bed at the same time as everybody else. Even if you're exhausted, try to kind of reset that circadian rhythm just right from day one. That's a better strategy. But timing your sleep, as I mentioned earlier, is important. So if you make it the same time that you go to bed and wake up, it really helps your circadian, your sleep-wake cycle to be set properly and to be more effective. Any of you guys if you've ever had your cortisol level tested, I don't do much of that anymore, but I used to do a lot of it many years ago. And some of you may know what your cortisol levels are if you've had them tested somewhere. But so many people will say that, yeah, my cortisol is low in the morning. So they wake up and like they do not want to get up, and it takes forever to get going. But at night, they're night owls and their cortisol is really high, so they're completely reversed. So you may have to do all of these things and really work at it to try to implement these changes because you need to reset that clock, okay? Otherwise, your dopamine production will be low, right? It's not a good thing. What are some conditions that you know of that are maybe very popular related to dopamine? Have you ever heard, are you aware of which what? I mean like a neurodegenerative condition, like Parkinson's, yeah, that's one example. So you want to do your very best, to take really good care of your dopamine production, and it's not something you want to mess with. And sleep is the best way to do that. There's some supplements out there, and I'll mention a few, but everything I just mentioned is where you need to start. Because if you just start taking pills and you're not changing any of the things that we talked about, you're going to be swimming against the current. And you might take something like magnesium that's typically really great for sleep and be like, it is not working for me. Well, you've got to take all these other steps too. These are more important than the supplements that you take. But there are some tricks, and I'm going to try to get through them real quick because we got to fit these in. There are some tricks that you can use to sleep better at night. So first, you ever feel like your mind just races at night and you can't quite calm it down? The worst thing you can do to calm your mind down is to focus on your mind, right? It just doesn't work, right? The more you focus on it, it just makes it worse. What you have to do is shift that focus onto your body. And body scanning, I think, is one of the best techniques for that. Imagine that you're laying down in a scanner that scans from top to bottom, and as that scanner comes down, as it goes through the forehead, really slowly, you consciously relax all of the muscles in your forehead and your temples. And once you've got them to completely let go, then you go to your eyes, and you go to your jaw and your facial muscles, and you imagine that they're completely disconnected from you. Like they're completely relaxed. And if you couldn't quite relax them all the way, you gotta wait. Keep that scanner right there until you just get it to let go. And then move down to your neck and your shoulders and all the other areas of your body. Most of the time, by the time you get to your feet, you're already asleep, if you do it well. If it didn't work, then do it again. And just keep scanning like that, and it'll just calm you down and put you to sleep. That's one of my favorite ones. The other one is the way you breathe. So breathing through your nose is a game changer. Ever heard of people taping their mouths at night so they can sleep better? right? I mean, I am terrified of doing that, so I don't think I would do it. But I know so many people who do, and they will say, it has changed my life. They have all this energy during the day, they sleep really well, because when you breathe through the nose, your body produces more nitric oxide, which opens up your blood flow, your vessels, and gets blood delivered better throughout your body. When you exhale, you want to exhale longer than you inhale, because when you exhale, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest part of your autonomic system. The sympathetic is that fight or flight system. When you inhale, you activate that fight or flight system. You need to breathe, so do inhale, but maybe a 4-to-8 ratio, right? Exhale longer, and that's really impactful. Other than that, supplement-wise, just real quick and then we'll close. Magnesium, threonate, glycinate, malate are my favorite ones. Threonate is best. It increases another neurotransmitter called GABA, which is calming. And we have this magnesium plug in our neurons that prevents our neurons from winding up. Magnesium is such a hero in my life. I think it's one of my favorite ones. Theanine is another great thing you can combine with magnesium to double that effectiveness. And then there's probiotics for sleep. We'll talk about those in 2 weeks. And there's other things you can take as well to further the effect. I talked about nitric oxide. You can take supplements like beetroot that have more nitric oxide in it to open up blood flow. And when you do that with your magnesium, it's just a great combo. So with that being said, one of the great resource as well, there's a podcast by Huberman Lab, if you've ever followed him, on sleep. They've got multiple podcasts that are hours long on sleep, so you can look that up, and I'll put the link in the notes that I sent you. So thank you so much, and next week Sue Becker will be here, and the week after I will actually have a pre-recorded session, because I won't be here physically, but I do have a guest speaker that will join me that is an absolute master when it comes to microbiome health, so the gut health. So I will be presenting with her, and we'll do that in 2 weeks, and I think it'll be even better than if I was here in person. So thank you.